I have members of Congress talking about teachers teaching hate. None of them have an education background, by the way. They're talking about teachers teaching hate. I work in Congress. When you go in the rotunda and you look at American history, you see colonists coming in and taking over America from the Native Americans. There is no reference to the black people who built this country in our rotunda. But we're scolding you about teaching hate. You know how many black statues there are in the Capitol? 3. You know how many Confederate statues there are in the Capitol? 12. I work in an institution that teaches hate, and with our policy. Yet we're scolding you as educators who have been doing the, Secretary Hall, thank you. Yet we're scolding you as educators who have been doing an exemplary job fighting against hate in our schools. So thank you for your work. Please continue to educate us. Now, I know none of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle will admit to being racist, and I don't think they are. But when you look at the rhetoric and you hear the talking points and look at the legislation that's put forward, what are we to say? Mr. Speaker, I've had guns pulled on me multiple times by law enforcement simply for being a black man in America. And now I see guns being drawn on peaceful protesters at Columbia University. When I was 11 years old, I was a victim of police brutality simply for being black in America. And now I see that brutality being inflicted on peaceful protesters at Columbia University. And for what? Simply exercising their First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble as they protest the collective punishment and murder of civilians in Gaza. 100,000 killed and injured, mostly women and children, protesting our taxpayer dollars going to Benjamin Netanyahu to continue this mass murder. That is their right. They are supposed to push us to stand for what this flag represents. Are we in a police state, or is this a democracy?
The gentleman's time has expired.
We must stand with our young people and demand justice and freedom.
The gentleman's time has expired.
And everyone in this world. It's very frustrating for me to sit here as a lifelong educator to listen to Republicans who do not have one former educator in their party on this committee talk about what we need to be doing in our schools and what we need to be doing when it comes to education. They supported the Trump tax cuts for the wealthiest Americans a few years ago and are now unwilling to even discuss making sure the wealthy among us contribute their fair share to the American economy and to education. They call themselves patriots. They call themselves patriots. They claim to love America. How can they love America when they are not investing in our most precious resource, which is our children? If you really love America, you want to see America grow and thrive for decades to come. The best way to do that is to make sure our children and families have everything they need. I would like to speak in opposition to this amendment for several reasons. Number one, since New York City has been mentioned multiple times, and since my background is as an educator in New York City schools, I just want to highlight for everyone in the audience and my colleagues across the aisle that New York City is what we consider a Title I district. It's a school system that cannot survive without the Title I funds that come from the federal government. The reason why the federal government had to step in, I believe, in 1965 to provide Title I resources to lower income communities is because of redlining that was allowed by the federal government in past legislation, which led to the underfunding, the chronic underfunding of schools simply based on race. If you were Black or Latino in a particular community, your schools were underfunded, while schools in white suburban communities that had access to federal funds to buy housing, those schools received additional funding. So now this amendment seeks to double down on prior racist policy by implementing present-day racist policies in targeting of Title I school districts. I also want to take exception to the term invasion as we describe what's happening here with migrants coming to our country seeking asylum. There's a long history of that word invasion being used to describe migrants, particularly from Latino countries coming into our country by white supremacists in their fear-mongering around the arrival of immigrants in our country. So I take incredible exception to that word invasion. We are not being invaded. People are coming here to seek asylum, as is the history of the United States. Much of this anti-immigrant rhetoric and policy is aligned to something called the Great Replacement Theory, which was condemned by this Congress in last Congress, and I am proud to be the author of that resolution. The Great Replacement Theory states that the white race is under attack by blacks, Jews, and immigrants, and we must do something about it. And many of the mass shooters in our country have identified the Great Replacement Theory as being the motivating factor to their mass shooting, including the Buffalo mass shooting in upstate New York. So the hateful, divisive rhetoric is in the resolution. The hateful, divisive rhetoric is a part of one of the amendments. The hateful, divisive rhetoric is historical as per redlining, and the anti-immigrant sentiment is directly connected to the Great Replacement Theory.
I want to remind the gentleman that you cannot engage in characterizing the other members' positions or calling their position, engaging in personality characterizations.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just very frustrating because it seems like the legislation itself engages in personalities when it refers to a group of people that is derogatory. So if the legislation is doing it and we're using words on the other side of the aisle like invasion as if it's an army coming to our country, is that not personalities? Thank you, and I yield back.
Representative Bowman, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Chancellor Banks, you didn't just roll out of bed and become chancellor, and your background is not only in school safety. You are also a classroom teacher, and you're also the founder of two highly regarded high schools, the School of Law, Government, and Justice in the Bronx, and the first all-male school in the Bronx as well, the Eagle Academy for Young Men. So I want you to speak to us briefly about the curriculum that is being implemented in New York City schools to address the issue of anti-Semitism and all hate. Please be as concise as possible because I have at least two more questions to ask.
Sure. Thank you so much for the question. So number one, teaching about the Holocaust, first of all, is required by New York State law. It's important to note. We also cover the Holocaust in grades 8, 10, and 11 in our social studies curriculum, as well as in a range of our ELA classes, including literature like The Diary of Anne Frank, Night, and many other literary pieces. We're also now working on a Holocaust resource guide, which is going to be available this fall in collaboration with the Museum of Jewish Heritage. But the thing that I think we're really super excited about is we are developing a very robust, comprehensive curriculum, new curriculum. It's going to be about a year before it's ready to go. That is going to cover the entire range of Jewish history. Children need to understand deeply about the history of the Jewish people if we ultimately want to solve for this issue of anti-Semitism.
So I appreciate that because that was going to be my suggestion because Jewish history didn't start with the Holocaust. There's an entire history of persecution that our kids need to learn about. There's also a part of history where the Jewish people and Muslims and Christians live together in harmony in the Middle East and different parts of the world, and I want to suggest you teach that as part of the curriculum as well. Mr. Sykes, can you talk about the distinction between anti-Semitic speech and speech that expresses solidarity with Palestinians or criticisms of Israel? Why is it dangerous to conflate the two?
Thank you. The ACLU has spoken out against the Anti-Semitism Awareness Act, not because we have any problem with anti-Semitism awareness, obviously, but because it incorporated a definition of anti-Semitism that includes criticism of Israel. And just as it is totally legitimate to criticize the U.S. government or U.S. government officials without necessarily casting aspersions on any particular individual, the government of Israel is certainly subject to criticism just like all others. Where that goes into ethnic-based hatred or targeting of particular individuals, obviously schools and communities can and should respond. But the right to dissent against our government and against others is core to free speech.
Thank you so much. And I just have a closing comment to make. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your clarity around when you identify anti-Semitism, you respond swiftly and decisively because it needs to be condemned and it needs to be handled accordingly. So I appreciate you all for being here and sharing that with us. What I'm going to ask of you, because I've been very disturbed by some of the language that has come from the other side of the aisle, language around teaching hate. Our teachers in our schools are not teaching hate, the majority of them. When I say majority, I mean 99.9%. I'm a former educator in New York City schools. I have never seen that. Teachers make mistakes, and teachers need to be educated and disciplined when necessary when they do make those mistakes. Yes or no question, just going down the line, starting with Mr. Banks.
Yes.
Can we fight against anti-Semitism and other forms of hate simultaneously? Yes or no?
Not only can we must.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
Yes. So it's really important because there's also been reports in the rise in Islamophobia in New York City schools and across the country. Do you all agree with that? Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
Yes. Does sexism still exist in our society?
Absolutely.
yes,
Of course.
yes,
Does anti-black racism still exist in our society?
Absolutely.
yes,
Yes.
yes,
I work in an institution that teaches hate and with our policy. Yet we're scolding you as educators who have been doing the statutory hold, thank you. Yet we're scolding you as educators who have been doing an exemplary job fighting against hate in our schools. So thank you for your work. Please continue to educate us. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's painfully obvious to myself, my colleagues, and the American people that the Republican Party is deeply unserious and unable to legislate. Their censure resolution against me today continues to demonstrate their inability to govern and serve the American people. Over the last 3 years, I have tirelessly fought for my district and my constituents by bringing over $125 million to the district, helping save members of our community over $7 million, and resolving over 6,500 constituent casework issues. I've introduced over 50 bills, resolutions, and amendments, and had 2 bills on STEM education passed in the historic CHIPS and Science Act. Even today, as Republicans force a censure on me, I introduced a new bill, the College Athlete Right to Organize Act, to ensure college athletes get paid for their time and hard work. No matter the result of the censure vote tomorrow, my constituents know I will always continue to fight for them. Fighting for my district includes working to prevent a government shutdown. And just over 2 months ago, I was rushing to the Capitol to vote and prevent a Republican shutdown. When I tried to exit a door that I usually go through, it didn't open, and due to confusion and rush to go vote, I pulled the fire alarm. I immediately took responsibility and accountability for my actions and pled guilty. Immediately. The legal process on this matter has played out. In no way did I obstruct official proceedings. The vote took place, and Democrats were able to ensure we avoided a government shutdown. Unfortunately, Republicans are here trying to rehash an already litigated matter, a matter in which the Republican-controlled House Committee on Ethics decided not to proceed with any further investigation. This is an insult to the people I was elected to represent. Instead of passing meaningful legislation for the American people, Some Republicans are using this censure to waste our time and money and to try and make you forget about all of the rights they want to destroy. They're trying to make you forget they want to take away your reproductive rights, your voting rights, your health care, your Social Security, and your Medicare. House Democrats have been trying to focus on and address the issues the American people care about. Can we please address the affordability crisis?
1 minute.
Thank you.
Gentleman's recognized.
Millions of Americans are struggling to put food on the tables, pay their rent, and keep the electricity on. Can we address the issue of gun violence? Just this week, we broke the record for the most mass shootings in a year, and we've lost over 35,000 people due to gun violence. Can we address our crumbling public school infrastructure? Kids are learning in schools with asbestos, no air conditioning, and mold, and it's hurting their ability to learn, grow, and thrive. Can we put an end to our massive spending on weapons and war and instead invest in our communities and our kids? The number one thing I tried to do as a middle school principal and as an educator for 20 years was to teach my students when they made a mistake, they owned up to it, they took responsibility, and they held themselves accountable. That's exactly what I did, and yet we are still here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back. I want to zoom out for a moment because the Republican proposed budget seeks to cut $4.5 trillion overall, which will obviously have a huge impact on education. And while Republicans continue to speak about these budget cuts, they do not also speak about increased spending to invest more in our children and our families. We have a current economic system where 2 of the wealthiest Americans own more wealth than the bottom 50% of the country combined. So the wealthy are not contributing their fair share, and large corporations are not contributing their fair share, whereas at the same time, we're talking about budget cuts. So we're not having honest, holistic, comprehensive conversations. And it seems the Republican Party is going through a sort of cognitive dissonance, where on the one hand, they're speaking about caring about student learning, whereas on the other hand, their budget proposal will cut hundreds of thousands of teachers from our classrooms. On the one hand, they're speaking about caring about student mental health, where on the other hand, their budget proposal will cut thousands of mental health professionals from being in our schools. Their budget would also cut the arts and music and sports programs, not just in the Bronx and Mount Vernon in my district, but also in Arkansas, Ohio, Michigan, Florida, and will hurt not just urban black and brown kids, but rural white kids as well. Rural white kids love music. They would love to learn how to play an instrument. They would love to have theater, drama, and arts programs in their schools, and they would love to participate in a holistic, comprehensive education program. But unfortunately, because local property taxes fund our schools more than anything else, wealthy kids continue to get the things that poor rural kids do not get and poor urban kids do not get. At the same time, they want to cut SNAP benefits. They want to cut $4 billion from Title I schools. These are the poorest, most vulnerable people. If we put them in desperate situations, they will turn to doing something that will harm their community, which is crime. Their budget also cuts hundreds of thousands of law enforcement officers. So now we don't have the resources to respond to our kids on the front end or the back end, and we're leaving our families to suffer. My question is this: speak to us about the impact of these cuts and how they'll contribute to the school to prison pipeline, and talk about how community schools can be a response to that.
Sure. You know,
The
as
gentleman has 20 seconds.
As the president said, show me your budget and I'll show you your values. It costs more to intervene and incarcerate than it does to educate. We're either going to pay now or pay later. We need to invest in our children and invest in our country.
Thank you, and I yield back.